Hello, marketing research students. Dr. Z here. I want to provide you with a brief overview of Chapter 10. As you read Chapter 10, keep in mind that much of the first part of Chapter 10 is aimed at research in which the researcher does paper surveys or possibly interviews. With the advent of electronic surveys using modalities like SurveyMonkey, some of the things that are described in this chapter are done automatically for you through the software. So the term data preparation actually meant getting your survey data ready for analysis. And again, if you were using paper surveys or interviews or transcripts, this would be more relevant than if you're using electronic surveys like SurveyMonkey. So I'll briefly cover the first 4 steps, and then I'll spend a little bit more time on data analysis as we move through the chapter. So the term validation basically means that the surveys or the interviews were conducted correctly without bias. They were actually answered, questions were answered by the participants. There's a term known as curbstoning, and that's where the researcher actually falsifies the data or maybe creates false questionnaires, completed correct questionnaires that respondents didn't fill out. This can happen, if, let's say you're working for a company and you get paid by the number of surveys that you get completed. Maybe you're tempted to just fill some out by yourself. That would actually falsify the data. Or, if you're in an academic group and your grade is based on getting a certain number of questionnaires or surveys answered, one might be tempted to just fill it out yourself, and obviously that would lead to false data. So in the validation stage, we want to make sure that fraud did not occur, that the proper screening questions were answered, and we don't have people answering the questions who were not qualified. For example, they weren't over the age of 18, or they didn't meet one of the other screening criteria. We want to make sure the research procedures were followed, complete survey data was obtained, and that the researcher was courteous to the participants. The editing stage is where we're looking to make sure that surveys were completed correctly and that mistakes were not made. Now, again, if you're using SurveyMonkey or something like that, it's gonna point those type of errors out. It's going to even safeguard against those type of things. But if you're doing interviews or focus groups or surveys, you would want to do some checking of your data to make sure that it's complete. And some steps with that: make sure that the researcher asked the questions that were in the interview guide. In other words, they didn't go off script, that the answers were recorded accurately, the screening was done correctly, and that open-ended questions were both completed and tabulated correctly. Coding is assigning values to various responses. Now again, SurveyMonkey, for closed-end questions, it will automatically code them. For open-end questions, we talked a little bit about coding last week, where you want to look for themes and categorize like answers by category. If you had hundreds of survey responses, you would probably want to assign numerical codes or values to your open-end answers. Again, for our purposes, we're not going to have hundreds of responses, so it's probably just as easier to break open-ended question responses into themes. When we use modalities like SurveyMonkey, the data entry is already done for us. The participant enters the data, it's in the program, and we can analyze it there. Data entry occurs if you're not using a software program to gather your survey data. So if you had paper surveys or interviews, you might have to enter data into a spreadsheet or a software program to analyze it. For what we're doing, we will not have data entry. Using internet surveys, again, it kind of, for lack of a better term, makes it idiot-proof, because respondents have to answer questions. It won't let them go on until they answer a question. So really, you're not going to have data entry errors. Respondents might answer incorrectly or falsify their answer, which that you can't really stop. But as far as, checking the wrong box or not answering a question with electronic surveys, there are safeguards in there to prevent error detection. It's the same thing with missing data. Electronic programs won't allow you to go forward unless you answer a question. So you may have inaccurate answers, but you should not have missing data in electronic surveys. Now we get to analyzation of data, and tabulation is a common way to do it. Tabulations is sometimes referred to as frequency count. It's the simplest process of counting the number of observations that are classified into certain categories. Two common forms of tabulation used in marketing research are one-way tabulation, and that's where you categorize single variables in an existing study, or cross-tabulation, where you simultaneously treat two or more variables in a study. Here's an example of a one-way tabulation or one-way frequency distribution from our textbook. The question was what other Mexican restaurants do you visit or do you frequent? And you can see the number of people that responded, Superior Grill, and what percentage of the total did that represent. And so a one-way tabulation just takes one variable, in this case, what other restaurants do you frequent, and allows you both number, frequency, and then percentage so that you can analyze the data. One thing to note, when someone does not answer a question, and I'll have to double check to see if SurveyMonkey even allows that, but if they would not complete a question answer, you do not include that in your results. You would not include that in your total. So in this case, you had 427 surveys, but only 414 of them responded. So your percentage would be based on the 414 rather than the 427. An example of cross-tabulation in that same example, maybe we want to break out competing restaurants, but we want to break it out not only by the name of the restaurant, but by male and female respondents. That would be an example of cross-tabulation, where we find out what the women in the survey said and what the men in the survey said as to what were competing restaurants to the subject restaurant. Descriptive statistics are used to summarize and describe data, quantitative data from a sample, and some of those measures are central tendency, dispersion, and then I would add to this standard deviation, range, which would be the from the lowest to the highest response, mean, median, and mode. Those are all terms that should come back from your probability and statistics course. For more on descriptive statistics, read pages 257 to 259 in your textbook, and read that carefully, and that will help with a good understanding of descriptive statistics. The other part of this week, I'm going to focus on getting you more familiar with SurveyMonkey. I kind of made an executive decision that we're going to use SurveyMonkey for our electronic surveys, unless your group strongly wants to use one of the other ones that we talked about, like Google Forms or one of the other programs that we looked at. But I'm actually going to subscribe to SurveyMonkey, and I'll give you the access code to it. And so what I want you to do is make sure that you read, or make sure that you watch these 4 videos that will be posted in week 10 about using SurveyMonkey. I want you to gain a good familiarity with setting up surveys in SurveyMonkey, how to analyze the results, and ways to increase your response rates. So make sure that you pay attention to those videos. Also, your assignment's going to be aimed at actually getting your SurveyMonkey questionnaire ready. I hope this was helpful. Take care, and we'll talk soon.